Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really plunging into something fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
The whole landscape of female orgasm, but, exploring beyond just the basics.
Yeah.
We've pulled together quite a range of information for you, stuff from, like, detailed sex technique guides, forum discussions, and also some pretty insightful anatomical details.
Exactly. And this deep dive, it's really for you listening.
Yeah.
We want to move past the sort of common knowledge
Right.
and really shine a light on the different pleasure zones in the female body, not just the clitoris.
Yeah.
The idea is to highlight specific techniques, maybe some areas of sensitivity that, well, could genuinely lead to some aha moments for you.
Think of this as your shortcut, basically. Your express route to getting seriously informed. We've gone through tons of material
Uh-huh.
covering the G-spot, this thing called the deep spot, or AFE, the U-spot, even the clitoral root, which often gets missed.
Yeah.
So we're aiming to give you practical stuff, but without, drowning you in jargon.
We did the legwork so you don't have to.
Exactly. We sifted through it all. Okay, so let's start unpacking this landscape. Maybe start with the most familiar area, clitoris.
The clitoris, yeah, absolutely.
Right.
It's, and quite rightly, often seen as the primary source of orgasm for many women.
Mm-hmm.
Its sensitivity is often put alongside, like, the tip of the penis.
Right.
You find it at the top of the vulva, usually tucked under the clitoral hood, and it's incredibly sensitive, packing a huge number of nerve fibers.
How many are we talking?
Somewhere in the range of 8,000 to 10,000,
Wow.
which explains why even, a light touch can have such a massive effect.
It's pretty amazing. And here's something really interesting, right? Newer anatomical understanding shows it's actually way bigger than we used to think.
Much bigger.
The bit we see, the glands, that's just the tip,
Yeah.
literally. But a lot of its structure is internal.
Yes.
It goes way back into the pelvis, even sort of wraps around the vaginal opening.
Which helps explain why certain movements, like pelvic thrusting during sex, can also stimulate it, even without direct touch on the outside.
That's a really key point. So clitoral activation isn't just about direct manual stimulation.
No, not at all. The info we gathered points to sort of three main ways it usually gets activated.
All right.
There's the direct manual stimulation, obviously. Then there's contact with partner's pelvis during intercourse.
Uh-huh.
And, of course, oral stimulation.
Right. And as many people know, that incredible sensitivity, well, it can be a bit of a double-edged sword.
Definitely. Overstimulation can happen pretty quickly.
Yeah.
It can become uncomfortable or even painful if things get too rough or, just too intense for too long.
So the advice that kept coming up in the sources.
Gentle
Yeah.
and lubricated touch. That's absolutely key.
Gentle and lubed. Got it. We did see a few specific techniques mentioned, too.
We did. Things like gently rolling a wet finger over the clitoral hood.
Okay.
Another one involved running a finger upwards towards the belly button. The thinking there is it might stimulate that internal part we mentioned.
Interesting.
And there was also this rubber band technique mentioned.
Right. What was that?
It's about applying gentle pressure just above the hood while the clitoris itself is being licked. Supposedly enhances the sensation.
Huh. And what really seemed clear across the board was the importance of, like, mixing it up, variation.
Totally. It's not about just constant hard pressure.
No.
Alternating the type of touch, changing the rhythm, and definitely avoiding being too rough seems to be the consistent advice.
Yeah. One source even kind of hinted that maybe less is more sometimes with the clitoris.
Suggesting that while it's obviously super potent, there are other areas that might be just as, or maybe even more, powerful to explore.
Okay, so that's a perfect segue. With that in mind, let's venture a bit deeper, right? Let's talk G-spot.
The G-spot, yeah, it's got quite a history.
It does.
Well, it was first noted by de Graaf way back in the 17th century.
Wow, okay.
But it really came into focus later and got its name from Dr. Ernst Grafenberg, who described it in more detail around 1950.
And anatomically, how's it described?
Often described as being sort of analogous to the male prostate gland. Similar kind of tissue, apparently.
Okay. And where exactly is it?
The general consensus from the sources is it's typically a small batch of tissue, often described as maybe pea-sized,
Right.
located about 2 inches inside the vagina, on the anterior wall, that's the upper wall, towards the belly button,
Okay.
roughly halfway between the pubic bone and the cervix. But, and this is important, the exact spot can vary from person to person.
Right. Not always in the exact same place.
Exactly. And the info we looked at also suggested that finding it might be a bit easier in certain positions.
Like what?
Like sitting or squatting, for instance, or having a partner help explore.
Makes sense. And there's that thing about the feeling, right? Initially.
Ah, yes. Initial pressure can sometimes create a sensation a bit like needing to urinate,
Okay. Why is that?
just because it's located pretty close to the bladder.
Right.
But the sources are pretty reassuring that feeling usually fades and then shifts into pleasure for many women.
And the orgasms people describe from G-spot stimulation, they sound quite different.
Very different, often. Some women report these deep, sort of rolling sensations. Others describe them as really powerful, very sustained orgasms.
Mm-hmm.
We even saw accounts where women actually preferred the ongoing smaller orgasms they could get from G-spot stimulation over one big clitoral one.
Interesting. So, okay, how do you actually stimulate it effectively? What are the techniques?
But the most common descriptions involve inserting a finger,
Okay.
usually palm up, with the finger gently curled, kind of like you're motioning coming.
Right, the come hither motion.
Exactly. Applying pressure with that hooking motion, or maybe gentle circular movements.
And pressure-wise, gentle like the clitoris.
Actually, no. Generally, the sources suggest firmer pressure often works better for the G-spot compared to a really light touch.
Okay, firmer pressure. Good to know.
And another thing, as arousal increases, the G-spot tissue itself can actually swell up a bit.
Making it easier to find, maybe.
Potentially, yeah.
And what about combining it with clitoral stimulation?
Oh, yeah, that seems really common and effective for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Doing both at the same time, manually or orally, alongside G-spot pressure.
But again, it all comes back to talking about it, right?
Absolutely crucial. The sources hammered this home.
Right.
Open feedback is key to find the exact spot and figure out the right pressure and rhythm for that individual.
Okay, so G-spot covered. Now let's go even deeper into maybe less charted territory. The deep spot, also called the A-spot or AFE.
Right, the deep spot. This one's located a bit further in than the G-spot.
How far?
Generally about another inch or two up, but this time on the back wall, the posterior side.
So opposite the G-spot.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
Just above the cervix, right at the very back of the vagina, in what's called the anterior fornix.
And stimulating this area sounds like it can have a pretty dramatic effect.
Yeah, the sources report things like really rapid, significant lubrication.
Wow.
And very intense, almost primal feeling orgasmic contractions for some women.
And anatomically, any theories?
Interestingly, yeah. Some perspectives speculate it might even be a sort of vestigial prostate gland, similar to the G-spot theory.
Huh. And are there positions that make it easier to reach?
There are. Positions like woman on top can work well, especially if she positions herself quite high up on her partner.
Okay.
And rear entry is often mentioned as being pretty effective for reaching that deep posterior area.
And technique-wise? Still the come hither.
Similar, yeah. Reaching deep along that back wall and using a stroking motion.
Okay.
One source got really specific, describing how when a woman's highly aroused, the very back of the vagina might form a little pocket.
A pocket.
Yeah, and pressing a fingertip right into that pocket while also maybe consciously engaging the PC muscles can apparently be incredibly intense.
Fascinating. And the type of stimulation? Firm massage?
That seems to be the general recommendation, yeah, for massage. Some sources suggested it kind of mimics the natural ballooning and muscle contractions that happen during orgasm anyway.
And a big difference from the clitoris here.
Is that the deep spot doesn't typically get painfully sensitive with ongoing stimulation.
So you can keep going.
Potentially, yeah. Which might allow for longer, more sustained orgasms for some.
Okay, wow. So we've covered clitoris, G-spot, deep spot. Let's quickly touch on a couple of others mentioned. First, the U-spot. What's that?
The U-spot is basically the sensitive tissue right around the opening of the urethra.
Oh, okay, so where exactly?
Just below the clitoris, kind of at the entrance or mouth of the vagina.
Gotcha. And lastly, the hidden part of the clitoris, the root.
That's right. As we said earlier, the clitoris isn't just the tip. It has this significant internal structure.
Uh-huh.
The root extends maybe 3 or 4 inches back into the pelvic cavity.
And you can stimulate that. How?
There's a technique mentioned, sometimes called the triple treat or clitoris sandwich.
Okay. Sounds jigging.
It involves stimulating the visible clitoris with one hand,
Right.
while using the fingers of the other hand inside the vagina to press upwards on the front wall.
So you're sandwiching that internal root between the pressure points.
Exactly. But, crucial point, lots of lubrication is absolutely essential for this to be comfortable and work well.
Definitely sounds like it. Okay, so we've mapped out this amazing landscape of pleasure zones, but just knowing where they are isn't the whole picture, is it?
Not even close. The sources also offered some really vital context, like techniques and considerations that make a huge difference.
Let's start with something foundational. Mindset and communication.
Absolutely critical. Multiple sources really stressed that the goal shouldn't be about one partner trying to give the other an orgasm. That pressure is often counterproductive.
Yeah, performance anxiety is real.
Totally. The focus should be more collaborative, creating an environment where orgasm can just happen naturally without that pressure.
And communication. That just kept coming up again and again.
Nonstop. Being able to talk openly, honestly, what feels good, what doesn't. Giving and getting feedback without judgment. It's fundamental.
Building trust, creating a safe space, and it allows people to relax, right? To let go.
Exactly. One source even put it quite beautifully, saying sometimes women just need to feel they have permission to orgasm, to fully let go.
Oh, wow. Okay. And building on that, what about foreplay and anticipation?
Hugely important. So many sources emphasize getting into a really deep state of arousal before focusing intensely on specific spots.
How long are we talking?
Some suggest at least half an hour of dedicated foreplay. Allows blood flow to increase, sensitivity to heighten. Yeah. Just sets the stage.
And it's not just duration, but what you do, right? Building anticipation.
Yes. Gently exploring nearby areas first, inner thighs, buttocks, hips, before going straight for the genitals. It builds that sensory experience, increases arousal, and makes the eventual direct stimulation way more effective.
Makes sense. Okay, so when you do start direct stimulation, what about rhythm and pressure?
Key elements. The general advice is start gently, slow, steady rhythms, and pay super close attention to your partner's reactions.
Verbal and nonverbal cues.
Both, absolutely. And when something clearly feels good, maintain it. Keep that consistent rhythm and pressure. Avoid sudden jarring changes that can really break the mood.
Then the pressure itself needs adjusting depending on the zone.
Exactly. Clitoris often needs a gentler start, as we said, whereas the G-spot might respond better to firmer pressure.
Which again just highlights needing that communication loop.
Constantly.
Okay. Now, one of the really exciting things that comes up when you talk about multiple zones is multiple orgasms.
Right. Several sources suggested this is a real possibility for many women, especially when you alternate stimulation between different areas.
Like switching between clitoris, G-spot, maybe the A-spot.
Exactly. The different types of sensation can almost reset the body's response, making another orgasm possible much sooner.
And there was a specific note about G-spot orgasms and multiples.
Yeah, an interesting suggestion that G-spot orgasms might be particularly conducive to multiples.
Why is that?
The sensation is often described differently, maybe less peaked. And continuing stimulation through a G-spot orgasm might lead more readily into subsequent ones.
Fascinating. Okay, another practical point. Lubrication.
Non-negotiable, basically. Essential for comfort and effective stimulation everywhere, but especially for those deeper zones like the G-spot and A-spot.
Yeah, friction is the enemy of fun here.
Pretty much. Insufficient lube leads to discomfort, kills the mood, makes exploration just not appealing.
And what about body positioning? That can make a difference too.
A huge difference, yeah. Both for access and for effective stimulation.
Like rear entry.
Often mentioned for G-spot stimulation, yeah. The angle of penetration can work really well for hitting that spot.
And woman on top.
Also highlighted frequently. It gives the woman control over the angle and depth, which is great for finding her G-spot sweet spot.
Plus, it frees up her partner's hands.
Exactly. For clitoral stimulation or whatever else feels good. Even simple tweaks, like a pillow under the hips in missionary, can change the angle enough to improve G-spot contact for some.
Good tip. And it's important to remember it's not just about the genitals, right? The whole body is involved.
So true. The sources reminded us how interconnected everything is. Relaxing tension elsewhere, like massaging legs, kissing the neck that can boost overall arousal and make orgasm more likely.
What happens in the toes affects the, well, you know.
Kind of, yeah.
It's all linked.
And finally, it's important to acknowledge challenges too, isn't it?
Definitely. Some women do find it difficult to experience certain types of orgasms, or maybe only clitoral ones.
So what helps them?
Exploring different techniques, sure. But also really looking at psychological factors. Stress, anxiety, past negative experiences, emotional blocks. These can all play a huge role.
So patience and understanding are key.
Absolutely. Patience, understanding, reassurance from a partner, creating that supportive, safe environment is paramount.
Okay, so as we start to wrap up this deep dive, let's just quickly recap those main takeaways.
Sure.
Female sexual pleasure. It's incredibly diverse, way more than just one spot.
Mm-hmm.
The G spot, the deep spot, they offer really distinct, often intense paths to different kinds of orgasmic experiences.
And understanding the basic anatomy, using the right techniques, and prioritizing communication.
And being mindful of the emotional side of things.
We're all just vital ingredients for, well, better, more fulfilling sex for everyone involved.
Couldn't agree more.
So now a final thought for you, our listener, to maybe chew on. With this deeper understanding of these different zones, these nuances of stimulation, how might this knowledge shift your approach to intimacy?
What new possibilities might this open up for exploration and pleasure, either solo or with partners?
Yeah. What new questions, what new curiosities has this deep dive sparked for you about the incredible complexity of sexual response? Something to think about.